You ever wonder what makes learning, really click? It's not some kind of magic trick, right? There's actually a hidden architecture at play, a real design behind the best learning experiences. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that blueprint. We're going to explore the two massive pillars that hold it all up, the environments we learn in and how we figure out what's actually been learned. So let's get into it. So first, a question for you. Just think back for a second to a time you learned something really, really well. What was that place like? Was it the teacher, the way the room was set up, the people you were with? Just kind of hold that thought because we're about to break down the science behind what makes it all work. All right, the first big idea is this thing called the learning environment. And believe me, it's so much more than just a room with some desks. It's the entire context. The physical place, yeah, but also the social vibe, the emotional feeling of the room, and the intellectual challenge. Think of it like the whole ecosystem where knowledge actually grows. So let's dig into that blueprint. It turns out that any really powerful learning environment, it doesn't matter if it's a classroom or a corporate training, is built on three core parts. Let's break them down, starting with the one we all see first. First up, you've got the physical space. This is like the hardware of learning. And it might seem simple, but get this. Studies have shown that things as basic as having good natural light can boost student test scores by up to 26%. So you have to ask, does the layout make people want to talk to each other? Are the tools you need right there? These physical things can either put learning on the fast track or just stop it cold. Next, there are the social dynamics. This is the actual pulse of the room. It's all about how people interact. Is it easy to talk? Do people work together? I mean, a space where students and teachers can actually connect, maybe challenge each other a little, and feel like they belong, that's absolutely essential. And this might be the most important of all, the emotional climate. This is the bedrock. If you feel safe, if you feel respected and supported, you're willing to ask those silly questions, You're willing to take a risk and maybe fail a few times on your way to really getting it. Without that feeling of safety, real, deep learning, it's just not going to happen. Now, here's where it gets really cool. This three-part blueprint we're talking about, it's not just for a regular old classroom. People are using these ideas in totally new ways, way beyond the traditional four walls. Let's take a look at how these learning spaces are evolving. So a great example is the flipped classroom model. In the old school setup, class time is all about the teacher lecturing, right? Well, the flipped model, it just turns that completely on its head. Now, students watch the lecture at home, on their own time. And that means class time, that becomes a super dynamic workshop all for discussion, for solving problems, for actually doing things. It's a total game changer. And we can push this even further. Some of the best learning spaces out there have no walls whatsoever. I'm talking about outdoor and nature-based learning. They take the classroom out into the real world, using a park or a forest to teach everything from biology to how to work as a team. And honestly, the possibilities are just exploding. We've got fully online and virtual classrooms, spaces built entirely around teamwork or big long-term projects, and even incredibly realistic simulations for training people every single day. Okay, so we've got all these different kinds of environments, from the super traditional to virtual reality to just being outside. And that variety is amazing, but it brings up a huge question. With all these different styles, how in the world do we know if anyone's actually learning anything? How do we measure success? Well, the answer to that question brings us to our second pillar, assessment. Really, the whole point of assessment is to take that invisible process of learning, all the stuff happening inside your head, and make it visible so we can actually see it and understand it. And let's be super clear about what assessment means. We're not just talking about final exams and getting a grade. At its heart, assessment is supposed to be a supportive thing. It's all about gathering info to figure out what a student knows, what they can do with it, and, this is the key part, how we can help them get even better. And just like there's no single perfect learning environment, there's no single perfect test. The best teachers have a whole toolbox full of different ways to assess. And the real skill is knowing which tool to pull out for which job. Okay, so the two big ones you gotta know are formative and summative assessments. The difference sounds kind of technical, but it's actually super simple and really profound. Formative assessment is assessment for learning. I love this analogy. It's like a chef tasting the soup while it's still cooking, to see if it needs a little more salt. On the other hand, summative assessment is assessment of learning. That's the final dish being served to the customer. So see the difference? One helps you adjust along the way, and the other one, well, that's the final judgment. Now, let's talk about one of the coolest tools in that modern toolbox, authentic assessment. The whole idea here is to get away from abstract tests. Instead, we ask people to do things that are just like real-world challenges. So instead of a multiple-choice quiz on geometry, a student might have to, say, design a floor plan for a tiny house. They're using the same skills, but in a totally practical context. And this quote just nails it. The question is no longer just, hey, what do you know? It's what can you do with what you know? Can you take that knowledge and use it to solve a messy, complicated real-world problem? That is the real test of learning. And that toolbox is deep, believe me. It's also got things like portfolios where you can show how you've grown over time, performance tasks like giving a presentation or having a debate, and even self-assessment and peer assessment, which really gives students the power to be in charge of their own learning. So we've talked about learning environments, and we've talked about the tools for assessment. But here's the thing. They're not two separate topics. The real magic happens when you see how they're connected, creating this amazing, continuous cycle of growth that really helps build lifelong learners. Here's how that cycle works. First, you start by intentionally designing a great supportive environment. Then, inside that space, you have all these active learning experiences. After that, you use thoughtful assessment to see what people are actually understanding. And then, this is the most important step. You use that feedback to make the whole process better. And you start the cycle all over again. So, if you take away one thing, let it be this. A great learning environment and smart assessment aren't just two separate, nice things to have. They are two halves of the exact same whole. They're a powerful, interconnected system that's designed to create real, deep understanding that actually lasts. And that brings us all the way back to you. Now that you've seen the architecture behind learning, if you could change just one thing about how you learn, your environment, or how you're measured, what would it be? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.